Friends, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's a very important and special evening because we have a very important and special guest joining us today. Max Blumenthal is here to talk about his significant and groundbreaking investigative journalism. Max Blumenthal is a legendary investigative journalist. He has met with and interviewed world leaders. He's a published author of multiple books, including this one, The Management of Savagery, and others such as Goliath and Republican Gomorrah. He's a documentary filmmaker, and he's the editor-in-chief of the Gray Zone News. And most important of all, he's my friend. So Max, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Good to see you, Amar.
There's so much to talk about and not that much time, so let's get right into it. You've produced some investigative journalism, which I don't think it's a hyperbole to say it's been earth-shaking. That's how I'd describe it. I hold here in my hand an article from your website, and it's titled Charlie Kirk refused Netanyahu funding offer, was, quote, frightened by pro-Israel forces before death, his friend reveals. The subheadline says, a Trump insider and longtime friend of Charlie Kirk tells the Gray Zone how the assassinated conservative leader's turning point on Israeli influence provoked a private backlash from Netanyahu's allies that left him angry and afraid. The source said anxiety spread within the Trump administration after an apparent Israeli spying operation was uncovered. Max, could you speak to us more about this reporting?
Well, there are different angles to explore with this reporting, and I'm still doing more. I think everyone watching this who follows US politics closely was familiar with Charlie Kirk's retrograde views on race, uh, on so many other social issues, and the role that he played was very divisive by design. He was backed by industry, by finance, by the 1%, essentially to register voters for the Republican Party to ram through more laws, reducing their tax burden and pitting people against each other so they could basically run away with what's left of our public assets. I mean, that was the role he always played. That's how I always understood him. I saw him as sort of like the the youth voice of conservative incorporated. It was like an astroturfed movement backed by industry. And something changed. Basically, our country's changing. But Charlie Kirk started to change, at least on this one issue, because of the branding of the movement that he had sort of, become a leader within. America first, make America great again. Donald Trump comes to the fore and is sort of representing uh, this backlash of anger about not just um, the predominance of liberalism within established institutions, but also anger at the economic crisis, the housing collapse, which went unaddressed in the Obama administration with the bankers bailed out, the Iraq War. There were a lot of populist elements within the Trump coalition. And once it became clear, especially after October 7th, that Israel was playing a malign role, not only within our country, that it had the ability through its cutouts in Washington and across the country to dictate policy decisions, including decisions that counteracted American interests, that undermined American interests, but that it basically controlled Donald Trump. A new movement started to emerge, first during Donald Trump's first term within the conservative right-wing grassroots, and they took it directly to Charlie Kirk. This first played out through the TPUSA campus tours, the campus tours of the organization Charlie Kirk ran with an $80 million budget to propagandize college students under the behind the guise of debate. And right-wing activists from a group called the Groypers would line up at the microphone to challenge Charlie Kirk from the right on the US relationship with Israel, bringing up things like the Israeli deliberate attack on the USS Liberty, a basically a spy ship of the US Navy around the Suez Crisis in 1967, killing over 60 US sailors. And Charlie Kirk would just shut down the debate immediately. At one point, he actually brought up the fact that Israel allows gay pride parades in Tel Aviv as a point of defending Israel, which, I mean, he's not pro-gay in the US. So it really exposed him as kind of a phony in front of his own base. And it wasn't popular. After October 7th, the bottom starts to fall out among people under 35 in the US for Israel, for supporting Israel. I mean, they just, it wasn't just the genocide. It was, although that was a major factor on the left within the sort of progressive grassroots, but on the right, it was really the spectacle of Netanyahu just dominating the United States and being welcomed as the real leader every time he came to Washington, getting more standing ovations than the president, and clearly trying to drive the US into a war with Iran. And Charlie Kirk had to finally address that. And he would swing back and forth. He would make disgusting statements denying famine in Gaza. And then the next thing you know, he's platforming the most popular critics of Israel within the conservative movement: Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, comic Dave Smith, a libertarian anti-Zionist Jewish comedian, was debating on stage at TPUSA's Student Action Summit in Tampa, Florida last July. Megyn Kelly was speculating that the former Fox News host was speculating that Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad asset. And following that summit, Charlie Kirk fell under enormous pressure from the donors who had made him who he was, who had been funding him ever since he founded TPUSA in 2012. Donors like Robert Schillman, who is one of the most extreme pro-Israel donors in the US. Anything he donates to, he does so simply to make sure that the United States and that particularly Republican-oriented institutions do whatever Netanyahu and Israel wants. And Schillman grew outraged that Charlie Kirk was allowing this to take place at his events. So too did, I think, other donors like Bill Ackman were worried and wanted to make sure that Tucker Carlson didn't speak at another Charlie Kirk event. Bill Ackman was mocked on stage. This is one of the key billionaire Zionist cutouts for Netanyahu in the United States, sort of financial manager. He was mocked on stage at a TPUSA event by Tucker Carlson as a scam artist who basically made his money out of nothing and had no talents and contributed nothing to society. And Ackman wanted Charlie Kirk to block Tucker Carlson from being his keynote speaker at this upcoming December summit. So all of this is something I'd been following closely. And, I was thrilled by the reaction from the crowd at TPUSA to everything that was being said on stage, because it showed there was a rebellion taking place in the last bastion of grassroots support that Israel enjoyed. And I understood that Israel was already throwing as much money as it could at the problem to basically pay influencers. And they were very focused on the, America first, quote unquote, anti-woke influencers. They were flying them all to Israel. We could see it all unfolding. They were trying to buy as many, young, attractive women or Black influencers, Latino influencers. It was just like an all-out exploitation fest. The Israeli Foreign Ministry had ponied up $150 million per year for this. And so I knew that the pressure would be coming down on Charlie Kirk and his organization, but I didn't understand the full extent of it until he was killed. After he was killed, Netanyahu comes out and tries to claim Charlie Kirk's name, his legacy, claim him as a very close friend. Netanyahu, in a Fox News interview soon after the killing, blamed Islam and the left before it was even known who the suspect was. So he was also trying to direct Americans to direct the rage of Americans against his enemies, the enemies of Israel. And speaking to a longtime friend of Charlie Kirk, I knew these sources just through the grapevine, and because the Trump world is actually more accessible than the world of Biden, Obama, or the Clintons, who exist. They're much more cut off from alternative media. So I was able to have conversations with some of the figures who knew Charlie Kirk, and they told me that he hated Netanyahu, that he considered Netanyahu a bully, that he was considered him a manipulator, and that when Netanyahu invited him to Israel 2 weeks before his death, as Netanyahu said in one of his videos, many videos about Charlie Kirk's death, Charlie Kirk actually refused. Netanyahu never said if he accepted or not. And he was holding a letter that I think Charlie Kirk wrote to him, but he wouldn't read the entire thing. So that was the first part of my reporting. I wrote 3 installments of this investigation. The first one, within a few hours, had gone viral. It had like 100,000 views just on our website alone. It was clear I was really speaking to something real. And I started to get approached by more sources on the right, people I'd never talked to before, who were just wanting to pour their hearts out to me about their experiences in right wing media and uh, conservative, conservative mega activist circles like TPUSA, and how controlled it was by this Zionist donor class that was answering to Israel, and how there was no space for them to speak out about it. I produced a second investigation based on rumors I was hearing that I was exploring. I managed to nail down this influencer summit convened by Bill Ackman in the Hamptons, working with Charlie Kirk, where things just got even more uncomfortable in early August. And Charlie Kirk was at some point screamed at by some of the Zionist influencers who were there for questioning the Netanyahu imposed line. And he actually complained of moral blackmail about this summit. Bill Ackman called this a complete lie, but he had actually covered up the fact that the summit ever took place. And what was the real agenda of this summit? It was to buy impressions and millions of clicks for Israel among very avaricious, vapid, young conservative influencers who are basically actors or political prostitutes for whoever will buy them. And Charlie Kirk was supposed to preside over this whole thing. So he comes out of that summit and goes on Megyn Kelly's podcast, and you can see that he's venting, that he's very angry, and he's sort of in a state of psychological agony. And he complains that he has less ability to criticize Israel than an Israeli does. And it's because of what he calls stakeholders, referring to the big Jewish Zionist donors that made him who he was. So he had basically signed up. It kind of reminds me of the plot of this early 90s pulp book, The Firm, which was made into a film starring Tom Cruise, where like if you join a firm, you basically, if you try to leave, you will be eliminated. Do I think Charlie Kirk was eliminated by Israel? I have no evidence of that. But they were moving towards uh, an attack, a political attack on him. It was already playing out through Netanyahu's cutouts in the media. Ben Shapiro was attacking him. Mark Levin was attacking him. Laura Loomer was attacking him. I mean, this is someone who's making personnel and policy decisions inside the White House. It was already playing out, and he was complaining about it in public. So, and that's more the Israeli MO. And I learned in my, which I learned subsequent to the second part of my investigation, that Robert Shillman, who is the key funder of the Islamophobia industry in the US, as well as the most anti-Palestinian organizations across the Atlantic. He's also funding the anti-Islam hooligan Tommy Robinson, who's leading a race war in the UK. He funds Geert Wilders, the Dutch politician who's called to ban the Quran, and he's funded Laura Loomer. And Bob Shillman defunds him I mean, this was a guy who I'd heard he donated like over $6 million to TPUSA. He canceled, according to sources, a plaque that was going to be erected honoring him inside TPUSA's office complex in Phoenix. So I also learned that Charlie Kirk was being managed on a daily level by a right wing, Israeli funded, government funded rabbi in Israel from the US named Pesach Wolicki. And there were these small Zoom sessions that Charlie Kirk had to call into with Bill Ackman, a venture capitalist, fanatically anti Palestinian venture capitalist from Sequoia Capital named Sean McGuire, and Joshua Hammer, who's one of Netanyahu's key voices in the media and is editor at large at Newsweek. He's the guy who debated Dave Smith at TPUSA for Israel. And they were not basically, they were explicitly feeding him talking points and telling him what to say because they were afraid of what was going to take place on his upcoming campus tour, which began September 10th at Utah Valley University. And Pesach Wolicki, his self-appointed Zionist manager, said that Charlie Kirk was pushing back on a lot of the things they were telling him to say, that he had fallen under the influence of the media and of people close to him who were pushing him in another direction, which probably refers to people like Tucker Carlson. And they were deeply concerned and they were trying to make a WhatsApp group with him so he would be fed talking points minute by minute. I mean, that's not something you do to someone who you feel comfortable with as an Israel advocate. And they're not able to get access to him just through the personal bonhomie. It wasn't clear that Charlie Kirk particularly liked them. They were just kicking down a lot of money to his organization and holding money over his head. So he's killed on September 10th at this event under very strange circumstances. Anyone who's extremely online is not believing the official story. And it's increasingly unclear what the official story is when the FBI director himself says they're exploring different angles that the sniper might have taken, as well as multiple accomplices. And a, a theory develops online. I was not responsible for it. In my first installment of this investigative series, I said explicitly there is no evidence the Israeli government played a role in Charlie Kirk's killing. I called it an unsubstantiated theory, but others just ran with it. And it sort of seemed to make sense for them, considering that Netanyahu is at the helm of an, a, a historically unparalleled global assassination apparatus that even weaponizes household communication goods to kill people, referring to pagers. So for them, it sort of seemed to add up. Charlie Kirk was leaving the firm. Israel has the ability to kill people anywhere. They weren't being told the truth. And that just exploded online to the point where Netanyahu has had to come out twice and deny assassinating Charlie Kirk. Once out of his own volition, like he wasn't even asked during an interview, he decided to make a video on his personal channel denying Charlie Kirk. I've never seen this happen, where a foreign leader is denying killing an American public figure. And it could only be Netanyahu, because no other foreign leader enjoys that level of influence over not just American politics, but over American life itself, over American entertainment, over American finance. Netanyahu is the embodiment of Zionist occupied territory. So he came out and felt compelled to deny it. My theory is, for once, Netanyahu was innocent and he just wanted everyone to know. But who knows? The, the takeaway is that my investigative reporting on this has given the conservative grassroots that has been sick of being bossed around by the cutouts of a foreign country, one that happens to be an occupying genocidal entity, uh, it's given them a voice and they're more emboldened to speak out now. And this rebellion in the conservative grassroots is only going to grow. And why is this such a problem for Netanyahu? And why are they throwing so much money at this particular constituency and demographic in the US? There are two reasons. One, obviously, because Trump is president. And so, in order to influence the president, they need to keep his base on side. The other reason, which is more of a long term problem, is that Israel needs white Christian conservative men who increasingly make up a disproportionate portion of the enlisted military ranks, as well as military leadership, needs them to fight their wars. They have to go to war for Israel. They have to go fight Iran. And if the next round of conflict with Iran doesn't go so well, Netanyahu wants a ground war with US boots on the ground. It's the only way he believes regime change can take place in Iran, and that is his end game. That is the ultimate end game of Netanyahu and everyone who will come in his wake. So this is such a significant, pivotal moment. I guess you could call it a turning point in the USA, where not only the traditional bases of opposition to Israeli apartheid and Israeli control are more mobilized than ever, but a rebellion is taking place within the traditional base of pro-Israel support, and it's only growing and accelerating.
If two parties are engaged in a debate or in a conflict, if either of those parties feels confident in their position, there's really no need to engage in censorship or coercion. So this meeting you reported on with Charlie Kirk and the Hamptons being pressured by Bill Ackman, or even this bigger story in the media about uh, the guy from Oracle, Larry Ellison, buying CBS News and also trying to buy CNN, doesn't that indicate a lack of confidence in their own position?
Yeah, completely. Because I mean, what was CBS? They're going to make a bid on CNN as well. What has CNN been? They've been reliably propagandizing and manufacturing consent for Israel's genocide since October 7th. And now they cannot even be depended on. These legacy media assets, which are mostly watched by older Americans over the age of 60. So they're moving in to buy every media asset possible. And then there's TikTok. TikTok played a democratizing, or some would say radicalizing factor after October 7th because it gave so many talented young content creators the ability to educate people about Palestine. And so many young people were seeing the images we all see of children being shredded, neighborhoods being destroyed. And it was having an impact to the point where Ted Cruz from a Senate committee demanded it be shut down because it was simply too pro-Palestine, because it gave a voice to young people. You just can't let the youth have a voice. Jonathan Greenblatt, the ADL director, went to testify in the Israeli Knesset and declared that the ADL should be the way to stop it is to basically buy it. He said, just find some billionaires to buy it. We need to embrace the same spirit that led to the pager operation in Lebanon in order to stop anti-Israel media. That's almost word for word what he said in the Knesset. So it fell to one of the richest Americans, who is a longtime CIA contractor whose company was spawned out of the CIA, Larry Ellison at Oracle, someone who is an ultra Zionist who's hosted Netanyahu on his private Hawaiian island, Ellison's Island, whose son David Ellison was recently exposed through leaked emails by the journalist Jack Paulson for coordinating against the Palestine Solidarity Movement with the Israeli leadership, and who now plans to oversee the purchase of CBS News from Viacom and install Barry Weiss, the key voice and media den mother of the Zionist 0.1% in the United States, as executive editor. So it's just going to be naked, unsheathed Zionist propaganda, plus lots of anti-woke content. And the way that a lot of Democrats see this media takeover is that they think they call it a pro-Trump takeover, but they're only seeing the clouds and not they're not able to see the sky behind the clouds or the they're being myopic here. Israel has taken over Trump, and so any pro-Trump content is being managed by Netanyahu's cutouts. Ellison, Barry Weiss, uh, CBS just had a ombudsman installed who's a veteran Israel lobbyist named David Weissman from the Hudson Institute. So pro-Trump is basically Israeli controlled. And that's what this is about. And they're not going to stop there. They're basically trying to retrench control because they have lost the PR battle. They've lost the political battle after October 7th, even though they believe that they've won the military battle. But I think they may have won a Pyrrhic victory there.
I'm going to read a sentence or two from your article. According to Kirk's friend, who also enjoyed access to President Donald Trump and his inner circle, Kirk strongly warned Trump last June against bombing Iran on Israel's behalf. Charlie was the only person who did that, the source said, recalling how Trump, quote, barked at him in response and angrily shut down the conversation. The source believes that the incident confirmed in Kirk's mind that the President of the United States had fallen under the control of a malign foreign power and was leading his own country into a series of disastrous conflicts. Max, when you spoke with us in June, in the middle of the so-called 12-day war, you said to us at that time, and you said elsewhere, that you think that Trump is afraid of Israel. Since then, since the assassination of Charlie Kirk, you've doubled down on that claim. Can you please explain to our audience again why you say that?
Well, first of all, those lines you read were corroborated days after I reported them by Vice President J.D. Vance, who was seated in Charlie Kirk's chair hosting his show after his death. He said that Charlie Kirk did go to the White House and lobbied against striking Iran. He didn't have the details I had on Trump, but he probably was there, but didn't want to embarrass Trump. But of course, Trump was afraid. Of course, Trump is completely controlled and cowed and cucked by Netanyahu. That's why Netanyahu, according to Tucker Carlson, someone who's much more connected than I am to Trump world, said that Netanyahu is running around the region bragging about controlling uh, Donald Trump. I mean, Netanyahu said this openly about the US before, or at least he said it in private, and the video was leaked in 2001. He was bragging to a small group of settlers in a sort of and he didn't, I don't think he knew he was being filmed. He said the US is a thing you can move easily. So this is textbook Netanyahu. How does he control Washington? Through AIPAC, they control the Congress. They control media through assets, cutouts like Larry Ellison. They're controlling Trump through Miriam Adelson. They're controlling Marco Rubio through Paul Singer, his largest donor, who is just a neocon representing Israel. Ike Perlmutter, longtime donor to TPUSA, also big donor to Trump. He's another pro Netanyahu donor. Ron Lauder. There are so many of them. Actually, if you're watching this now, you can look up Netanyahu's millionaire and billionaire list, and you can find online a handwritten list of millionaires and billionaires inside the United States that Netanyahu uses personally. He personally wrote this list up to exert control over US politicians. But then there's the assassination factor. Donald Trump has faced 2 assassination attempts. The trial of one of his would-be assassins, Ryan Routh, just wrapped up. And with very little fanfare or media interest, Routh was sentenced to life in prison, tried to stab himself in the neck with a pen before he went to prison. None of his links Direct links to Ukraine were mentioned. Ryan Routh was recruiting for Ukraine's international brigade in Kiev. He had had meetings with the Helsinki Commission on Capitol Hill. He, I mean, this is strange, and none of it is mentioned today. And we scarcely ever hear about the first assassination attempt, which missed Trump's head by a few millimeters in Pennsylvania. And now there's a third major assassination that took down Trump's top, I would say, like his top activist operating in the field, someone who is on his way, on a trajectory towards running for the presidency, probably would have gone into the Senate or been a governor at some point. And you don't think that Trump is frightened? I mean, the whole 1% right now is frightened of the adventurous violence that's unfolding. Luigi Mangione scared the financial elite. Steve Bannon actually gave a speech or, participated in a panel speaking to some Silicon Valley, I think a Silicon Valley audience, or it might have been in Aspen, but I think it was in Silicon Valley. And he basically said this guy, Luigi Mangione, just walked up and killed some healthcare executive, and they're just going to come for you. And MAGA will protect you from them. That's why you need to support Donald Trump, because we will protect the rich from the violence of the left. And so that was their message for months. And then, I mean, they can't even protect their own guy. He's like hunted in public, shot down in the most dramatic way possible. His security team seemed to have no way of preventing it. Imagine a US president angering a figure as powerful as Netanyahu, who commands assassins around the globe. Uh, what would go through your head if you decided to withhold weapons to Israel and adamantly refused any of their lobbying machinations? What would they do? How would they stop you? And what would happen if the weapons stopped coming? For them, it would be existential. They believe they would no longer be able to survive. So I think Donald Trump understands this, but this is also something that I've been told by people who know Trump, who've been close to him. And I've known for years that he believed there would be assassination attempts on him, not necessarily from Israel. So I believe this is in his mind. And I also heard from someone who has very good access into the White House, inside the White House. And I've talked about this for the past week or so. I've been talking about it for like 2 weeks. That during one of Netanyahu's visits to Washington, or possibly during two earlier this year, agents of Israel placed electronic devices on the emergency response vehicles of the Secret Service, which would presumably respond to an attempt on the president's life. And the Secret Service found them. And I thought, this could be crazy, and I should consider whether I'm just being like fed some kind of conjecture, some hearsay. But there's a clear precedent there when in 2019, three former senior US officials who had been Trump officials, one of them might have even been like John Bolton. It wasn't Bolton, but three like national security officials went to Politico and said that Israel had placed Stingray devices. These are cell phone surveillance devices in and around the White House to spy on Donald Trump's cell phone communications. The NSA has concluded that Israel is the greatest spying threat to the US. In 2017, British former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, sorry, in his, well, he was British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, in his memoir, wrote that Benjamin Netanyahu had used his personal toilet, and afterwards, his security detail found a listening device placed in the bathroom by Netanyahu personally. And you have to start wondering, based on the Politico report, who could get access to the White House to place stingray devices. It's not just any random Israeli agent. There are people who get access through Netanyahu or through high-level Israeli visitors. So that's what Donald Trump and any US president are dealing with. And they're all cowed. They all just completely crumble in front of Netanyahu, who is absolutely ruthless. So I started reporting this weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, about these listening devices on the Secret Service vehicles. I was just in New York, and we can talk about this, for the UNGA, the UN General Assembly, and it was the most militarized I've ever seen New York, probably since 9/11, but period. I've been around several UNGAs and have never seen it that militarized. Like Amnesty International had a meeting and there were snipers on the roof outside. The meeting I was in yesterday was just teeming with security, which we'll talk about. But leading up to the UNGA, the Secret Service found thousands of SIM cards containing spying devices in order to spy on diplomats' phones, as well as listening devices placed around the area. Now, who would have been responsible for that? Could it have been the Israeli government and its leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, who just a week before, speaking to state lawmakers from the US in Jerusalem, said, Israel is inside your phone? Of course, he meant it in a different way, that Israeli technology has revolutionized the cell phone, but there was a strong tinge of irony to his comments, considering how much surveillance he's applying to a government that claims to be Israel's most unshakable ally. Israel's not an ally. It's ruling through manipulation and fear inside the United States. It's exerting power through manipulation and fear inside the United States and inside the Oval Office. And it's surviving through continuous genocide in its own region.
It's amazing. It's incredible that Boris Johnson wrote in his memoir that Netanyahu himself placed a listening device in his bathroom, and that also the Secret Service found tracking devices on vehicles. Max, you were in New York yesterday, and among other things, you also met with the president of Iran.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that meeting.
Yeah. I've been doing so many of these interviews about Charlie Kirk. I haven't gotten a chance to write up this meeting, which was at a hotel on the sidelines of the UNGA immediately after Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian met with Emmanuel Macron to discuss the looming and very hypocritical snapback sanctions that France, the UK, and Germany are planning to impose on Iran for supposedly violating an Iranian P5+1 nuclear deal, which the United States shredded in 2018. It's funny how only Iran has to comply with a deal that no one else complies with. And so he was late for the meeting, and I gathered in a hotel lobby passing through airport style security, very militarized setting. And in the lobby, I saw many of the people that we would recognize as sort of the voices and faces of the anti-war movement in the US, including people more on the conservative side who would get branded like isolationists, but it couldn't be more fairly described as like restrainers or realists. There were several analysts there from think tanks, and uh, but it was a very good crowd that was of all people who are opposed for various reasons to a U.S. war with Iran. Now, last year I met with Pezeshkian at the UNGA in a similar setting, but the meeting was composed mostly of mainstream media bigwigs, including like Lester Holt, Andrea Mitchell, Robin Wright from the New Yorker, uh, figures from the Washington Post. Iran was speaking to a different audience this time because it recognized that the mainstream media would not had delivered nothing for it, and that it was seeking a voice, a direct channel to the Biden administration then. But now there's no one to talk to in Washington. because Donald Trump had potentially set them up for the unprovoked Israeli assault last June, in which their commanding generals, their nuclear scientists, and their civilians were slaughtered in their beds in, again, an unprovoked attack, including by Mossad agents inside the country. And Israel did it with the knowledge that Donald Trump would come in the end and quote unquote finish this round of the conflict by bombing Natanz and Fordo and supposedly wiping out Iran's nuclear facilities and ending its uranium stockpile. Of course, it failed to do that. And now another round is inevitable. And so this meeting was convened under the premise that Iran would be attacked again by Israel with the expectation that the US, under Trump, who Israel controls, will come in and finish the job when Israel gets in trouble, which it will, and it will get into military trouble again. And Ms. Pezeshkian said openly, war is coming back to Iran for sure. And if they assassinate me, there are 5 people ready to stand in my wake and fill my shoes. It was a very grim and disturbing comment. He slammed Steve Witkoff, the negotiator who had been overseeing nuclear talks that Iran's government got involved in the last spring and summer under a deadline or a sort of Damocles declared by Donald Trump but imposed by Israel. And he said that Witkoff would sit there in Doha and make all these positive statements about how much he cared about peace and that he would abide by all of these. He would essentially restore the nuclear deal that had been signed in 2015, and then he would go back to Washington and say the exact opposite and basically echo the APAC line. He said, I wish someone had recorded these meetings. He was a complete liar. I mean, he just basically said Witkoff can't be trusted. I asked Pezeshkian directly about a speech that Iran's leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, made on September 23rd, which was last Tuesday, where he slammed negotiations, said that they are a declaration of surrender, that if we negotiate again by the US, we might as well just surrender, and that it would be complete folly. Khamenei warned last time that negotiations would lead to more sanctions and war, but the Iranian government, the reformist government, went into them anyway. And Pezeshkian didn't address my question directly when I asked if the leader's statement is reflective of his position. But you can clearly see that he does not trust the Americans and expects war to come whether he negotiates or not. He's under enormous pressure back home from the principalist elements, those who are regarded in the West as hardliners, and doesn't have a lot of political space, I think, to re-enter negotiations. And so there's a tight window for Israel within which Israel can attack. That's what I get from talking to analysts in the US and Iran that I trust who've been generally right about things. And the window may have been expanded by Israel's insane assault on inside Qatar, a US ally that hosts the largest US military base in the region, to wipe out the negotiating team and end negotiations with Hamas. But it probably will close around December because of congressional midterms and because Israel fears that Iran has begun repairing its multi-layered air defense system and restoring its ballistic missile capacity. In other words, its deterrence. And so Israel is going to just attack again, and we can see the writing on the wall. Marco Rubio was just summoned to Jerusalem by his masters, kissed the wall, wore a kippah alongside reciprocal Israeli US ambassador and Christian Zionist fanatic Mike Huckabee. I wonder what was being discussed there. And now Netanyahu, a wanted war criminal under ICC indictment flew over most European countries, circumvented Portugal and Spain, and is in New York now. And he's going to be pushing for more war. So, what we're witnessing right now, I think, is the beginning of another Israeli push for war with Iran that will necessarily involve the US. And Iran's president was sending the message to the American people through us, the part of the American public that understands the stakes from on the left and the right, that we can't allow this to happen. That was his agenda, and he also spoke about his desire for a more progressive social environment in Iran that provides women and ethnic and religious minorities with more rights. Of course, ethnic and religious minorities in Iran have rights under the constitution, which they don't have in Israel, which actually has no constitution. And I'll be releasing a documentary fairly soon about my interactions with Iranian Jews while I was there. But this was the sort of reformist side of Pezeshkian. He was also speaking about friendly relations with neighbors like Azerbaijan, which was used as a base for Israeli attacks on Iran. Overall, a meeting that didn't contain the most substantial, I mean, from Pezeshkian's standpoint, the comments weren't especially substantial or concrete, but the general tone of the meeting was dire because of the imminence of war.
This isn't the story that we'll hear on the corporate media, but you and others who've spoken with us, such as Chaz Freeman, Mohammed Marandi, many other credible voices, they said that in this last round of fighting, the so-called 12-day war between Israel and Iran, it's pretty much a consensus among these credible voices that it was Israel who tapped out because Iran was penetrating their air defense and they were having trouble withstanding Iran's targeted attacks on their military institutions. So, if the last round of fighting between Israel and Iran didn't go as Israel expected, who's to say that the next round will?
Yeah, it won't. Um, and many, if not all Iranians that I spoke to, like all of them who I met on my trip, who have very different perspectives. Like I got to meet people from all walks of life and from very different perspectives. They believed that Iran would have won a war of attrition, and they were disappointed that the war ended when it did. And we've since learned that Israel suffered much more damage financially or economically and structurally than we knew because of their censorship regime. The US role in Israel needs to be understood better because it was deeply damaging to the long-term designs of US empire for the US to be engaged at that level. And the faction, like you could call it the Vance faction in the Trump administration, that opposed war with Iran and lost the debate, their motives are different than ours. We just, maybe first and foremost, we want to save lives. And we oppose US empire because it's ruthless and rapacious and violent. They want war with China because China is emerging not just as a near peer competitor, but is moving towards superseding the US as a superpower through much more sophisticated avenues of trade and economic ties and infrastructure, Belt and Road in other countries. And Trump has even said that BRICS must be stopped. How are you going to do that when you've wasted 1/3 of your entire THAAD stock, your stock of anti, your most advanced air defense interceptor missiles in 12 days? And it takes a long time to repair those. How are you going to defend Taiwan? How are you going to defend the Philippines or Japan? Any of these frontline vassal states that will do the bulk of the fighting and the dying against China? How can you do that? You cannot. And so the conflict with China was actually set back. Ukraine was forced to transfer Patriot batteries to Israel and THAAD systems in advance of the war, and Ukraine has suffered as a result. I mean, the proxy war in Ukraine has suffered as a result. So, from the point of view of just like raw imperial planning, if you're Elbridge Colby, someone who's opposed the war with Iran because you want to confront China, this is a real drag. And Israel is like a ball and chain on the ankle of American empire, and you just can't get them off you. And the war is coming again. You're going to have to defend them again. And it's going to be a more, as Pezeshkian himself said, it will be a more violent conflict. And Iran claims they have weapons that they had not deployed before. And I actually believe them because of the way that they have staged the series of True Promise operations with Israel. If you look at the first Operation True Promise, this was all after October 7th. The targeting was either poor or deliberately not very destructive. They used their older missile stocks. True Promise 2, same thing, although some of the targets that they started to approach were Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv, and they struck fear certainly into the hearts of the civilian population in Tel Aviv. True Promise 3, they broke Israel's air defense system, which is the most advanced air defense system in the world. They broke through every layer of it, exposed the Arrow system as a paper tiger, forced the US to come in with its THAADs, destroyed the Weizmann Institute, where Israel does nuclear and drone research. I mean, they were hitting high tech targets left and right. And Israel's only hope uh, is to be able to carry out standoff attacks over the Caspian Sea and be able to take out as many ballistic missile batteries as possible before the conflict gets too hot. And I think they've lost the advantage with a lot of the Mossad cells that they had established inside Iran because Iran has found that many of the Mossad agents who were recruited were poor migrants. I don't know if this is true. But they carried out mass deportations of almost the entire Afghan migrant population, and they are in um, like lockdown mode, hunting for Mossad agents. Iran is it's not a police state. Like it's a very chaotic society, and it's hard for state security, the IRGC, to keep tabs on everything. So it would be easy to see how Mossad agents could be recruited, and they're enticed. I mean, we published a piece exposing how Israel, one of the ways Israel recruits Mossad agents inside Iran and in Europe, working in sensitive facilities, and they do it openly and offer them loads of money through crypto channels. They have tons of money to spare for these operations, but I think they were weakened by the last round of conflict. I don't know what else Iran has up its sleeve, but closing the Strait of Hormuz would strangle the entire global economy. And then Israel would be blamed for wrecking the global economy. And this could happen ahead of midterms and cost Trump dearly because of his close relationship with Netanyahu. And I think it's almost certainly going to happen.
A few minutes ago, you said something along the lines of that the Israeli influence over the United States needs to be better understood. That Israeli influence over the United States, that's something that apparently was very much frustrating Charlie Kirk in the last days, last weeks of his life. I'm going to read a quote now from his friend and former colleague, Candace Owens. Candace Owens said, quote, I think in the end, Charlie was going through a spiritual transformation. I know it. He was going through a lot. There was a lot of pressure, and it's hard for me to watch the people who were pressuring him just say the things that they're saying. She continued, they wanted him to lose everything for changing or even slightly modifying an opinion. It's very hurtful to me. That's what Candace Owens said. I think that's a very profound statement or observation by her. And I think it's hard to know. I think it's impossible for people to know what's inside a person's heart and soul. I think as a Muslim, I think only God knows that. But I think evidence that supports her claim that Charlie Kirk was going through a spiritual transformation, there's evidence to support that, such as he was lobbying Trump against going to war with Iran. He was resisting pressure from people like Bill Ackman and Benjamin Netanyahu. That's very significant and important context to understand in the story of Charlie Kirk for many reasons. One of those reasons, I think, is that people like Bill Ackman and Benjamin Netanyahu, as you've said, Max, have been praising Charlie Kirk and talking about their association with him in a very positive light, but they're leaving out the fact that he rejected a recent invitation to visit Netanyahu. He was resisting pressure from Bill Ackman and others. So, in a way, these people like Ackman and Netanyahu, they're perverting the truth.
Well, this was something Candace said right after Charlie Kirk's death. And so she hadn't found her voice yet because it just was inappropriate to launch into a political polemic. But what she said set the stage for everything else and has been proven correct through my reporting, which is that a lot of these figures who are, many of them who are claiming Charlie Kirk's legacy as their own, from Netanyahu to Bill Ackman, were simply lying. And she did know that he was undergoing a change. She was probably pushing him in that direction. She certainly was, along with other figures. So we'll never know where he would have led the conservative movement had he lived on. I think if he had undergone a real spiritual transformation, he would have changed all of his views and disbanded his organization, but that's just how I interpret the world. But on this point, she was also referring to rumors, which she, knowing Charlie Kirk, has better insight into than I do, that he was actually getting interested in Catholicism. Charlie Kirk was a Christian Zionist who came out of Protestant evangelical Christianity, which sees Israel as covenant land given to the Jews by God to fulfill Revelation, which will eventually be the landing pad for the Messiah and the basis of the rapture. And he was moving away from that, moving away from his pastor, Rob McCoy, who's part of his, basically part of his organization, and was beginning to attend Catholic Mass with his wife. It's true that he was attending Catholic Mass with his wife. And after his death, his communications director, Andrew Colvett, sort of tried to spin it as they were just enjoying the view inside the Catholic Church. But had he left Christian Zionism, that would have been a sign, and that was that he was moving the conservative, seeking to move the conservative movement away from Christian Zionism as well. There was nothing, if he was a figure that sort of transcended Israeli influence, but at the same time, he depended on the Zionist donor class. But he was a larger than life figure within the conservative grassroots. So he had the capacity to lead them away from Christian Zionism. And again, after his death, Ben Shapiro, one of the leading Israel First voices in sort of pseudo-conservative, conservative incorporated media, co-hosted Charlie Kirk's show and announced that he was making $1 million donation to encourage more young people to come to Christ. Very weird statement, especially from someone who doesn't believe Christ is the Messiah because he's Jewish. But also weird because where did Ben Shapiro get $1 million? His organization, the Daily Wire, is collapsing. They canceled everyone's credit cards last year. Their offices are shuttering. It wasn't working. Ben Shapiro is like an AstroTurf fake creation. No one actually likes listening to him. And so he has $1 million to give to TPUSA to encourage people to come to Christ. That's not what's going on there. Some Zionist billionaire gave him $1 million to gift to them so that they would encourage people to come to Christian Zionism, which, according to Candace Owens, Charlie Kirk was moving away from. So we can clearly see what's happening here. And who is taking over TPUSA? Charlie Kirk's wife, Erica Kirk, who is said to be a Catholic, who has not come out and shut Candace Owens down yet, I don't know where she stands, but they are building her up at this point and using her to raise money over Charlie Kirk's casket. And they're basically promising her political stardom in the future. So is she going to actually take on the Zionist donor class? I don't think so. I think they're going to come back in and use TPUSA to retrench their power in the United States the same way that they did with that they're doing with CBS and TikTok and every other entity that they can buy. And there's really nothing that I can see standing in their way now.
Max, I'm going to ask you two more questions and then we'll wrap up the program. So can you alluded to this earlier. Can you talk to us in a little bit more detail about this article you wrote about mega donor to Charlie Kirk's organization, Robert Shillman, and how
Well, I
he,
think I described it in detail. So I don't have much more to add except that this was a closely guarded secret, and I'd heard rumors about him losing a big donor, but I got a tip from a TPUSA insider, and I learned from a completely separate source who had attended a gala dinner for an anti-Islam organization in Los Angeles called the American Freedom Alliance that Bob Shillman had gotten up and given a speech and said he was cutting Charlie Kirk off and basically grumbled about Charlie Kirk. And so I started making phone calls to corroborate or confirm what that attendee told me. Got the president of that organization on the line. She wouldn't answer my question and hung up on me. I got the MC of the event on the line. He wouldn't answer my question. He was at least polite and said he could neither confirm nor deny. And then I got Bob Shillman himself on the line and he hung up on me. So it seemed pretty clear that he was the donor, and he has a history of doing this to organizations that he funds. And that cost them a lot of money, a lot of money. I mean, millions. They have an $80 million budget, and he was responsible for a fairly substantial portion of it. So that's the kind of pressure that any major conservative leader is under. That's the money they rely on, along with industry money. A lot of that industry money comes from oil men or financiers who are themselves Christian Zionist. And there are, to my knowledge, there are no Catholics in leadership positions at TPUSA. Like all of them are evangelical Christians. It was basically like a Christian nationalist organization. And Christian nationalism has been synonymous with Christian Zionism. But this shift is occurring. The issue is the Republican Party is so much more responsive to the donor class, even more than the Democratic Party, that someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who will still be speaking, I think, at TPUSA's December conference, and is the leading critic of Israel in Congress, more critical than AOC, making much more substantial statements. She can't get anything done in the Republican Party. Like, no one will join her. No one will co-sponsor anything Israel related with her. And so that's a huge problem. To put it all into perspective, another election's coming up. The country is more solidly against Israel than ever before. It may not be pro-Palestine, but they're just sick of Israel. And they're the candidates that will be nominated or will for the nomination in both parties will not answer these concerns in any substantial way. And so what we're going to see increasingly is the lack of democracy in this country and the how little voice we have. And so we have to force the issue. We have to find new ways of forcing the issue, and it has to be done outside of the two-party system.
the last question I'll ask you tonight, Max, is as far as you can tell, or as far as you know, what is the current state of Israel's genocide or ethnic cleansing of Gaza and the West Bank too, I'll add.
Well, the violence is intensifying in Gaza City. day after day. We're getting less coverage of it because Israel has killed the top field correspondents, most recently Anas al-Sharif. That was by design, but you can see images of the families who are being slaughtered in their homes in airstrikes. I think 170 were killed in Gaza City and across the Gaza Strip in the past day. Center of the Samir Project, which was supplying the North with aid, one of the last organizations supplying the North with aid, was struck by an Israeli bombing. And Israel is using these remote controlled vehicles to detonate explosives to blow up entire neighborhoods in Gaza City. And they're doing this for the reason that I think it's Israeli housing minister Limor Livnat stated in an interview in Israeli media, which is to destroy the city of Gaza so that they can never come back. She openly said that. Last May, Netanyahu said, "We will destroy their homes to force them to leave." And ultimately, Israel will try to force them to leave Gaza altogether. That's the next part of the plan after the population is forced from the north and placed in biometric concentration camps, where the only source of food is the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is run from behind the scenes by Israeli intelligence and the Israeli military through, by the way, um, American frontmen like Reverend Johnny Moore, who was close to Charlie Kirk's operation and was a mentor to Charlie Kirk's communications director, Andrew Colvett. It's disgusting. The West Bank is a prison. The Allenby Bridge was closed following the recognition of a Palestinian state by France and the UK. And now no one can go in or out. The Palestinian cities are cut off from one another, and they're blocked. Like anyone who wants to travel from Ramallah to Bethlehem has to pass through layers of settler terrorists and military backing up the settler terrorists. So getting out on the road is extremely perilous. And Israel wants to annex the West Bank. It's out in the open that that's their plan right now, to Gazify the West Bank. They've been Gazifying the North, carrying out mass kidnappings of young men in order to suppress the armed rebellion against their occupation. This will all continue for as long as a US president like Donald Trump, who is completely under Netanyahu's thumb, is in power. And at the same time, I'm seeing the various civil society actions that are underway make an impact. The, the Samud flotilla, which has come under attack from Israeli drones, including with chemical weapons, but also with small explosive charges. Boats filled with citizens from Italy, from Spain, from the UK. Nelson Mandela's grandson is on one of the boats. I believe Greta Thunberg is on a boat. And they have now compelled the governments of of Spain and Italy to send naval ships as escorts. So they've basically compelled something that could lay the groundwork for the Unite for Peace proposal put forward by the former UN human rights expert Craig Mokhiber, which is calling for an armed international or United Nations protection force to guarantee the entry of aid into the Gaza Strip. And I think, that's something that we should be calling for and campaigning for. What we need is military intervention in Gaza to end the genocide. And the failure to do it means that the so-called international community is completely bankrupt, and the post-World War II order was it is gone, is completely gone. Where does it go next? I don't know. I just think we have to do something every day. Just do something every day to try to make this stop. That's all we can do. That's all anyone watching this can do. Is just to do something every day.
Thank you, Max. Thanks for your tireless efforts. Before you spoke with me right now, you spoke with Matt Gaetz. You met
Yeah.
with the president of Iran yesterday. You've been tireless and prolific in your efforts to really get to the truth of these really important issues.
Thanks a lot. You can see the dark circles under my eyes. I'm definitely due for some rest, but yeah, there's more to do, and I should have more juice in this investigation. So follow the gray zone.
We'll follow it closely, and everyone listening, follow the gray zone. Max, thank you also for connecting me with retired Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Aguilar, who will be speaking with the Community Church of Boston on the morning of October 13th, which is Columbus Day. And I'm also happy to announce that the moderator of that program will be retired Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who was the Chief of Staff to Secretary of State Colin Powell. So very much looking forward to that. And again, thank you, Max, for connecting us with that. I'm going to let you go, but hold on for 30 seconds because I'm going to close with a very quick reading. This is from the Quran, and I read this because these are the words of the Quran that Muslims recite during times of death and catastrophe. And it's these words and words like these that give people in places like Gaza strength to remain steadfast in the midst of a genocide. In the Quran, in chapter 2, ayat 153, it says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. You who believe, seek help through steadfastness and prayer, for God is with the steadfast. Do not say that those who are killed in God's cause are dead. They are alive, though you do not realize it. We shall certainly test you with fear and hunger and loss of property, lives, and crops. But give good news to those who are steadfast, those who say, when afflicted with the calamity, we belong to God, and to him we shall return. These will be given blessings and mercy from their Lord, and it is they who are rightly guided. And those are words from the Quran. Thank you again, Max, and thank you everyone so much for your